The desert was wide and endless, carrying with it the silence of centuries. The wind moved softly across the dry land, lifting trails of dust into the air before setting them down again, as if the earth itself was breathing. Far away, the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows that stretched across the open plains. It was the kind of land where life was hard, where every sound mattered, and where the choices of men carried weight heavier than stone. In that world, a lonely Apache sat by the fire with his only son, knowing that soon the boy must face a decision that would shape not just his life, but the life of his people. The father was old, his shoulders bent from years of carrying burdens that no one else could see. He had fought for his tribe, for his family, and for the land beneath his feet. Yet in all his victories, there was one emptiness he could never fill. The boy's mother was gone, taken by time and sorrow, leaving behind a silence that no war cry or drumbeat could cover. For years he had raised his son alone, watching him grow tall and strong, carrying within him the fire of their people. Now the boy had reached the age where he must choose a path, and with that path came the choice of a mother for the children that would one day be born from his bloodline. 5 women had been brought before him, each from families that carried honor and respect. They were strong in their own ways, chosen carefully for what they could give. Some carried the skills of weaving, some the wisdom of healing. Others the spirit of laughter that could keep a fire warm through the coldest night. To the old Apache, this was the natural way. A son must take from among the women of their people, keeping blood and land tied together. He told his son as much, his voice steady but tired. Yet there was a weight in his words, as though he already feared that the boy's heart would not rest where tradition pointed. For in the shadows of the camp, another figure waited. She was not one of the 5. She was not of their people. She was a prisoner, taken after a raid that had left behind scars too deep to forget. Bound by the life she now lived, she carried herself with a silence sharper than any blade. Her eyes did not lower, nor did her spirit bend, even when the firelight revealed her as an outsider, in a world that could never fully accept her. To many, she was nothing more than a reminder of war, a mark of victory, and a burden to be watched closely. But to the son, she was something different. He saw in her a strength that had not been broken, a quiet defiance that spoke louder than all the songs of their tribe. The boy had watched her from a distance, not as a warrior studies an enemy, but as a man studies a secret he does not yet understand. Every step she took, every word she did not speak, drew him closer in ways he could not explain. He knew what his father expected, he knew what the people would whisper, but in his heart a fire burned that would not be easily put out. He had no words for it, only a knowing that somehow she was the choice meant for him. The father did not miss the way his son's eyes lingered too long where they should not. He felt the pull of youth, the dangerous road of desire mixed with defiance. Sitting by the fire, he spoke with the weight of a man who had lived long enough to see how quickly choices can tear apart what many hands had built. He reminded his son that blood carries duty, that a man's heart cannot stand alone against the will of a people. Yet even as he spoke, there was a part of him that remembered his own youth, his own moments when his heart had wanted what the world said he could not have. The night carried heavy silence between them. The son stared into the flames, seeing more than fire. He saw a life where he followed the path his father had laid out, a life with one of the 5 women who waited with quiet expectation. It was a life that would be safe, a life that would honor his people. But he also saw another path, one where the woman in the shadows became more than a prisoner, where she became the heart beside his own. That life was not safe, it was filled with risk, but it was alive in a way he could not ignore. The land around them seemed to echo his conflict. Coyotes called in the distance, their cries sharp against the night. The wind pushed through the dry grass, carrying the scent of smoke and sage. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the river moved slow and steady, reminding him that all paths eventually meet their end. But here now, he stood at the edge of a choice that could change everything. The old Apache leaned forward, placing a hand heavy with years on his son's shoulder. His voice dropped low, almost breaking under the weight of what he asked. He told him to remember who he was, to remember the line of men before him, to remember that every decision carried not only his own future, but the future of those yet to come. He reminded him that a man who chooses with his heart must also be ready to face the storm it brings. The boy listened, his jaw tight, his heart pounding like a drum. He wanted to honor his father, to carry the pride of his people. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. The prisoner. The woman no one would expect, the one no one would allow. The one who carried in her silence the promise of something greater than all the rules laid before him. When dawn broke, painting the desert in gold and crimson, the sun rose with the weight of decision heavy on his chest. The 5 women stood waiting, their faces calm, though their eyes carried the truth of what was at stake. His father stood nearby, watching with the patience of a man who had seen too many battles. And there, in the shadows, the prisoner stood apart, not expecting her name to be called, not imagining she could ever be chosen. The boy's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward. Every eye in the camp followed him. The fire of tradition burned hot behind him, but the pull of something wilder, something untamed, pulled him ahead. His father's words still echoed in his ears, but so did the beating of his own heart. He knew what was expected. He knew the safe road. But he also knew the truth that lived inside him, the truth that no rule could silence. And as he opened his mouth to speak the name, the camp held its breath. The world itself seemed to still, waiting for the choice that would either honor his people or set fire to everything they believed in. The prisoner lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze, and for a moment the air between them carried the weight of a storm not yet broken. What he was about to say would change everything. The boy's lips parted, but the name did not come out. The silence was heavier than the desert air, pressing on him from all sides. His father's eyes, worn and steady, bore into him, waiting for the choice that should have been simple. The 5 women shifted slightly, their dresses catching the faint light of the morning sun. None of them spoke, but their stillness was a kind of unspoken plea, each carrying the quiet hope of being chosen. The prisoner did not move. She stood where the shadows met the light, her hands at her sides, her face unreadable. Her eyes, though, betrayed a flicker of something: curiosity, defiance, maybe even fear. She had been in that camp long enough to know her place, long enough to feel the weight of eyes upon her, but never long enough to imagine she could change her fate. And yet, in that moment, she felt the storm gathering. The sun swallowed hard, his voice caught between duty and desire. He knew that if he called her name, the air would split with anger. He could already hear the whispers that would ripple through the tribe, feel the cold stares that would follow him wherever he walked. His father had given him wisdom, but wisdom did not quiet the fire in his chest. He stepped back, leaving the moment unanswered, and the people shifted uneasily, sensing that something inside him did not rest easy. The background of their story ran deeper than the dry riverbeds carved into the desert floor. The boy was the last heir of his line, the son of a man who had carried his people through war and famine. His father had once been a fierce warrior, known for his strength and his unshakable resolve. But time had worn him thin. His hair had turned gray like ash, his eyes had dimmed with sorrow, and the loss of his wife had carved a hollow in him that no victory could fill. Raising his son alone had been his greatest battle, and now this final decision, this choosing of a woman to stand beside his son, felt like the last piece of work he must see done before the earth claimed him. The 5 women offered were not chosen by chance. Each carried ties to families that strengthened bonds within the tribe. One was the daughter of a healer, her hands skilled in herbs and cures that saved lives in harsh winters. Another was quick with laughter, her spirit bright enough to lighten even the darkest days. One could weave cloth so fine it was said to carry blessings in every thread, while another had the patience of the earth itself, her calm presence enough to steady the restless. The last carried within her the memory of stories passed down through generations, her voice able to keep alive the wisdom of the ancestors. To choose any of them was to secure the future of the tribe, to weave the boy's life into a tapestry that had been built for centuries. But the prisoner she was the thread that did not belong. She had been captured after a clash with a neighboring settlement, taken when the dust of battle still hung heavy in the air. Some said she had fought fiercely before being bound. Others whispered that her silence afterward was her sharpest weapon. She did not beg for freedom, did not weep for her loss. She moved through the camp with the dignity of someone who had not surrendered her spirit. And that quiet strength unsettled many, for it was easier to hate an enemy who broke than one who stood unbroken. The boy had first noticed her while helping gather water near the stream. She had carried the buckets with steady hands, her back straight, even under the weight. He had watched the way she looked at the land, not as a prisoner trapped in it, but as someone trying to understand its soul. In the evenings, when the fire crackled and the tribe told stories, she would sit on the edge, listening without speaking, her face caught between shadows and flame. He wondered what stories she carried in her own heart, what memories she guarded so fiercely. Every day his heart pulled closer, even as his mind warned him of the danger. He would catch himself searching for her in the crowd, watching the way the light touched her hair or the way her eyes narrowed when she thought no one was looking. It was not just the fire of youth that drove him, it was something deeper, a sense that her path was tied to his in ways neither of them could yet name. The father knew the look in his son's eyes. He had seen it once before, long ago, when he himself had loved against tradition. That love had cost him dearly, though he had never spoken of it aloud. It had taught him that a man's heart can both guide and destroy, and that the weight of choice could crush even the strongest shoulders. He feared his son was walking the same dangerous road, one that would not end in peace. Around the camp, whispers had already begun. Some said the boy was hesitant because he carried the pride of youth, unwilling to be bound so quickly. Others said he had inherited his father's stubborn spirit, always walking against the wind. But a few noticed where his gaze lingered, and those whispers grew darker. The idea of choosing the prisoner was not just unthinkable, it was a threat to the balance of their people. To bring her into the family would be to bind enemy blood with their own, and that was a wound no tradition could heal. Still, the boy could not turn away. He tried to remind himself of the 5 women, their strengths and their worth, but his thoughts circled back to the prisoner every time. At night he lay awake, hearing the low hum of the wind against the tippy walls, his mind restless. He wondered what she dreamed of, if she thought of freedom, if she thought of home. He wondered if she ever thought of him. The prisoner, for her part, said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was its own kind of shield. But when she felt his eyes on her, something inside her shifted. She did not want to feel it, did not want to believe that the son of her captors could carry such gentleness in his gaze. She tried to bury it beneath anger, beneath pride, but there were moments when she caught herself wondering what it would mean if he truly saw her, not as a prisoner, but as something more. The desert was patient, but time was not. The day of decision drew nearer, and with it, the tension in the camp grew heavy. The father grew restless, his sleep broken by dreams he could not explain. He would rise before dawn, staring at the mountains, asking the spirits of his ancestors to give him strength. He had always believed that the line between right and wrong was clear, that tradition guided the way. But now, watching his son hesitate, he felt the old doubts return, doubts he had buried long ago. The boy's choice had not yet been spoken, but already it carried the weight of destiny. The 5 women waited with patience, though some had begun to sense that his heart was not with them. The elders whispered of omens, the young warriors spoke of honor, and the prisoner kept her silence. But in the stillness of the night, when only the fire kept its watch, the boy and the prisoner would sometimes meet eyes across the flames. And in those moments the world seemed to hold its breath, as if even the desert knew that something greater was stirring. It was a story not just of one choice, but of the clash between duty and desire, between tradition and freedom. The boy stood at the edge of that clash, his heart torn between 2 worlds. The father feared what was coming, the tribe waited for the word, and the prisoner held within her the quiet strength that could either save them or destroy them. And so, the morning came again, the sun rising slow over the horizon, painting the land in fire and shadow. The boy knew the time was near, that soon he would have to speak the name that would seal his path. His father's voice still echoed in his mind, the tribe's expectations weighed heavy on his shoulders. But the beating of his heart was louder still. The prisoner stood apart, her eyes fixed on the ground, yet she felt the pull of something unseen, something she could not deny. And as the boy stepped forward once more, his breath caught in his chest, the silence around him sharper than any blade. The world seemed to wait again for the choice that would shape all that was to come. The camp grew uneasy with each passing day. The boy's hesitation hung over everyone like a storm that refused to break. People went about their work mending tools, tending fires, gathering water, but their eyes carried questions that no one dared to speak aloud. A choice that should have been celebrated was turning into a shadow that followed them all. The father noticed the shift. He saw the small changes, the way the elders whispered longer after their counsels, the way laughter among the young women quieted when his son entered. What should have been simple was no longer simple at all. The boy felt that weight every time he walked through the camp. His friends, other young men near his age, looked at him differently now, some with respect, thinking he was being careful, not rushing his decision. Others with impatience, wondering why he dragged his feet when so much was at stake. To them, choosing a wife from among the five was not just about family, it was about strength. A leader must stand firm. But he was torn, and that tearing grew sharper each day. The prisoner felt the changes as well. She noticed the way eyes turned toward her more often now, suspicions sharper than before. She did not seek attention, yet she knew it followed her like a shadow she could not shake. The women avoided her more than usual, their silence carrying a message she did not need words to understand. Even the children, once curious about her, had been pulled back by their mother's watchful hands. She was becoming the center of something she did not want, something she could not control. The father called his son to sit with him by the fire one evening, the flames casting light across his lined face. His voice was steady, but underneath it was a quiet ache. He reminded the boy again of what was at stake, spoke of families tied together through marriage, of how one choice could strengthen or weaken the tribe. He spoke of duty, not just to himself, but to the generations who had lived and died to keep their people standing. The boy listened, his hands clenched tightly around his knees, every word pressing harder against the conflict in his chest. He wanted to answer, to say what burned inside him, but the words stayed locked behind his teeth. Far from the father and son, the five women also felt the strain, were caught in the middle of a silence they did not create. Each of them had prepared herself to step forward, to honor the choice if it was given to her. But now they lived in waiting, their days filled with questions they dared not ask aloud. One of them, the weaver, sat late at night with her loom, her hands moving but her heart heavy, wondering if her skill was enough. Another, the healer's daughter, whispered prayers to the wind, asking for clarity. Their lives were bound up in the boy's decision, and the longer he waited, the harder it became for them to carry themselves with patience. The elders began to grow restless. They had long believed that tradition kept their people strong, and to them this delay was dangerous. Around the fire, when the moon was high, they spoke of omens. Some said the boy was being tested, that the spirits were watching to see if he would honor the path laid before him. Others feared his hesitation was a sign of weakness, that he might not have the strength to lead when his father was gone. A few, though, fewer still, wondered if his heart pointed towards something no one wanted to name. Beyond the camp, the land itself seemed to reflect the unease. The desert winds grew harsher, tearing through the canyons at night like voices crying out. Coyotes lingered closer, their howls sharper, echoing through the darkness. Even the river, once steady and calm, ran lower, its waters thin and restless. The people took these signs seriously, for in their world, nature often spoke louder than words. The boy tried to find peace by wandering away from the camp. He would climb the ridges at dawn, watching the sun rise across the endless horizon, trying to quiet the storm inside him. But no matter how far he walked, he could not leave behind the prisoner's face. Her silence haunted him, not with pain, but with questions. He wanted to know her story, the truth of where she came from, the dreams she carried. He wanted to know if she ever thought of freedom, or if she had given it up long ago. More than that, he wanted to know if she felt the same pull he did, if the fire in his heart was shared in hers. The prisoner wrestled with her own thoughts. She had built walls inside herself, tall and unshakable, to survive the life forced upon her. Yet cracks had begun to form, and through those cracks slipped thoughts she did not want. She remembered the way his eyes softened when they met hers, the way he sometimes lingered near without speaking. She told herself it meant nothing, that it could mean nothing, but still the thoughts came. She had once lived free, once belonged to a family and a home, and she wondered if allowing herself to feel was a betrayal to all she had lost. The father saw these changes even if the boy thought he hid them. He saw the way his son looked across the fire, the way his steps slowed near the prisoner. His heart ached with fear, for he knew that path was filled with danger. It was not only the tribe's anger he worried about. It was the weight his son would carry if he chose against them, the loneliness of walking a road no one else would accept. The father had walked roads like that, and he bore the scars still. He wanted to shield his son, to guide him back to safety, but he also knew the fire of youth cannot always be smothered by reason. As the days passed, smaller conflicts began to grow. A group of young men, jealous and restless, began to speak openly of their doubts. They whispered that the boy was not strong enough to lead, that perhaps another should take his place when the father was gone. Their whispers spread like sparks through dry grass, catching on ears eager for certainty. The tribe, once unified, began to shift in quiet ways. Some held firmly to tradition, others began to question what was right, and all of them watched the boy with sharper eyes. The prisoner felt the tension turn toward her more directly. One evening, while carrying water, she heard the hiss of a voice behind her. A woman accused her of casting spells on the boy, of trying to twist his heart against his people. The prisoner did not answer, did not fight back, but the sting of those words sank deep. She knew she could not defend herself, for any word she spoke would only feed the flames. She walked on in silence, but that silence was heavier than before. The boy heard of this, and his anger burned hot. He wanted to defend her, to tell them she was not to blame. But he knew speaking too strongly would only reveal his heart before its time. He clenched his fists, swallowed his words, and let the fire burn inside. Each day the choice grew harder, and each day the cost of that choice grew higher. The father called a council. He gathered the elders, the families of the 5 women, and his son. The firelight danced on their faces, their eyes sharp with expectation. The father spoke of patience, but his voice carried the urgency of a man running out of time. He told them his son must choose soon, for hesitation was feeding doubt, and doubt could tear them apart. He turned to his son, his voice firm, his gaze heavy, and asked him to speak at last. The boy's throat tightened. He looked at the 5 women, each of them steady, each deserving in her own way. He looked at his father, whose strength was fading, but whose spirit remained unbroken. Then, almost against his will, his eyes slid to the prisoner. She stood apart, her face calm but her eyes betraying a storm of their own. For a moment the camp fell silent, every breath waiting for the words that would come. But the boy could not speak them yet. His voice caught, his heart thundered, and once again he stepped back from the fire without giving the name. A murmur spread through the crowd, sharp as the crack of dry wood. Some shook their heads in disappointment, others in anger. The prisoner lowered her gaze, though she felt his eyes still on her. The night closed around them, heavy with unanswered questions, and the fire burned low, its embers glowing like the conflict still alive inside them all. The choice had not yet been made, but already its shadow stretched long across the desert, promising that whatever came next would not leave them unchanged. The fire burned low, casting red light against the circle of faces, and the boy stood with his heart trapped in his chest. The silence after his hesitation cut deeper than words. The elders exchanged looks, their mouths tight with disapproval. The 5 women shifted uneasily, though none of them broke their calm. His father sat still, but his eyes were heavy with both weariness and warning. The prisoner remained apart from them all, her presence like a shadow no one wanted but none could ignore. The boy turned from the fire, leaving the council without a word, and the murmurs followed him into the night. From that moment, tension spread through the camp like dry grass catching flame. It was not spoken directly, but everyone felt it. The boy's refusal to choose was no longer just about a wife. It had become a question of his strength, of his loyalty, of the tribe's future. He could not walk through the camp without feeling the weight of eyes on him. He could not draw water from the stream or sit by the fire without whispers rising around him. His silence was louder than any declaration. The father wrestled with his own doubts. He wanted to believe his son would choose wisely, but every day without an answer deepened the rift. He thought of his people, of how hard they had fought to remain strong against every storm. He thought of the promise his son carried, the blood of their ancestors running through him. And he thought of the prisoner, the dangerous pull she seemed to have on the boy. The father's memories returned to him at night, old scars of choices made and paths taken, and he feared history was repeating itself in a way that could tear apart what little remained whole. The prisoner, though silent, was no fool. She felt the weight of the boy's gaze even when she did not meet it. She heard the whispers, the blame placed upon her shoulders. She kept her head high, but inside she was torn. She had not asked for his attention, had not invited the thoughts that now seemed to surround her. Part of her longed for freedom, for escape into the world beyond the camp, to walk once again where her steps were her own. Yet another part of her felt the strange bond forming between them, a bond she could neither explain nor break. The 5 women, too, carried their own storms. Each had been taught patience, but patience wore thin when tied to uncertainty. They began to wonder not just about the boy's choice, but about their own worth. The healer's daughter questioned if her knowledge meant nothing to him. The weaver doubted her gifts, wondering if beauty could not catch his eye. The one with laughter grew quiet, unsure if joy had a place in his heart. Each night they sat together saying little, yet each carried the same weight. The younger warriors grew restless. Some spoke openly now, saying the boy was unfit to lead. They argued that a leader should be strong, decisive, unshaken by emotion. Their voices grew louder around the fires, stirring doubt among the people. A few even hinted that another might step forward when the father was gone, that the tribe could not afford to wait for a boy who could not choose. These whispers reached the father, cutting deep, but he held his ground. He still believed in his son, though his belief grew harder to carry. The land itself seemed to share in the unrest. Storms gathered on the horizon, clouds rolling heavy and dark, though rain refused to fall. The air grew tense, charged with a weight that set nerves on edge. Coyotes howled longer into the night, their cries carrying through the canyons like warnings. Even the horses grew uneasy, stamping and pulling at their reins. The tribe read these signs as omens, and the elders pressed harder for the boy to decide before misfortune found them. One night, the boy could bear the weight no longer, slipped away from the camp, and found himself standing near the stream where the prisoner often went to fetch water. The moonlight touched the surface, turning it silver, and there she was, kneeling with a bucket in her hands. She looked up when she saw him, her eyes calm but guarded. For a long moment they said nothing, only the sound of water breaking the silence between them. Finally he spoke, his voice low, almost trembling. He told her he did not know why his heart turned toward her, only that it did. He told her of the fire that burned inside him, of the choice that felt less like choice and more like destiny. She listened, her face unreadable, but her silence felt heavier than words. At last, she answered, her voice quiet but firm. She reminded him of what he risked, of the anger his choice would bring, of the lives it could change forever. She told him she did not ask for this, did not wish for chains heavier than the ones she already carried. Her words cut him, but they did not break him. Instead, they deepened the storm inside him. He returned to camp with her voice echoing in his ears, and he knew that no matter what warnings he was given, no matter what weight was laid on his shoulders, his heart had already chosen. The prisoner was no longer just a shadow to him. She was the only truth he could not deny. But the world around him was closing in. The elders called another council, their voices sharp with frustration. They spoke of unity, of tradition, of the need for decision before the tribe fractured. Some pressed for a deadline, demanding he choose by the next moon. Others suggested he step aside if he could not bear the weight. The father stood in his defense, his voice strong, though his body trembled with age. He warned them that forcing the boy would only break him, but his words carried less strength now among those hungry for certainty. The young men whispered of rebellion, though not yet openly. The women carried their unease in silence. The prisoner remained the quiet center of it all, though now her silence drew more suspicion than ever. Some began to say she had cast a spell over the boy, that her presence was a curse. The thought spread, feeding fear into the restless hearts of the tribe. The boy felt the walls closing around him. Each day was another test, each glance another weight. He could not escape the stares, could not silence the whispers. He wanted to shout the truth, to name her before them all, but he knew the storm it would unleash. Yet the longer he waited, the stronger that storm grew, until it felt as though even the earth beneath him might break. His father called him one final time, his voice softer now, his strength fading. He told his son that choice was a river that could not be dammed forever. He said that when the moment came, the boy must stand firm, no matter where his heart led him. He warned him that courage is not in choosing the easy path, but in standing when the world rises against you. The boy listened, his chest heavy with both fear and resolve. The storm clouds rolled closer, the tribe's patience thinned to a thread. The 5 women prepared for whatever decision would come, though their hearts no longer carried hope in the same way. The prisoner waited in silence, her fate bound to his choice whether she wished it or not. And the boy stood at the edge of it all, his heart set, though his voice still locked behind his lips. The night before the deadline, the camp sat in uneasy silence. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the dark. The elders sat stiff, their eyes sharp. The young warriors stood ready, their anger simmering just below the surface. The father sat near the flames, his strength nearly gone, but his spirit unbroken. The prisoner stood apart, her shadow stretching long in the firelight. The boy stepped forward, the weight of the world pressing down on him. Every face turned, every breath held. The air was thick with tension, the kind that promised something would break before dawn. His heart thundered, his hands trembled, but his eyes found hers across the fire. And as the silence stretched to its breaking point, the moment before words would change everything, the night itself seemed to hold still. The storm waiting just beyond the horizon, ready to strike. The fire snapped in the still night as the boy stood before his people. Every eye was on him, every breath drawn tight, waiting for the word that would shape the rest of their lives. His chest rose and fell with the weight of generations pressing against him. But at last his voice found its way past the knot in his throat. He spoke with a calm that surprised even himself, and when he did, he named the one no one expected. He chose the prisoner. The silence that followed was unlike any before. It was thick and heavy, like the desert air before lightning splits the sky. The 5 women lowered their gazes, not in shame, but in resignation, for they had felt his heart drifting away long before the words were spoken. The elders stiffened, their faces carved in disbelief. The young warriors muttered among themselves, anger rising like smoke. Even the fire seemed to hesitate, its crackle dimming in the weight of what had been said. The prisoner stood frozen, her eyes lifted slowly, searching his face as though she needed to hear the words again to believe them.
Ow.
She had never expected it, never wished for it, and yet now her life was tied to his in a way she could not untangle. For the first time since she had been brought into the camp, her silence faltered, and the faintest tremor of breath escaped her lips. The father rose slowly, leaning on his staff, his body weak, but his spirit steady. He looked at his son, then at the people gathered. His voice, though strained with age, carried the authority of a man who had led them through storms before. He told them the boy had spoken from his heart, and though it was not the choice they wanted, it was the choice of a man ready to stand against the world. He reminded them that strength was not always found in the path everyone agreed upon, but sometimes in the path no one dared to walk. His words calmed some, but stoked the anger of others. The elders warned that bringing an enemy into their family would weaken the tribe. The young men growled that the boy was blinded, that he was risking them all for desire. Yet the father stood firm, his presence alone enough to hold them back from open rebellion. He declared that the decision had been made, and no word would be taken back. The firelight caught his face, and for a moment his weariness fell away, replaced by the old strength that had carried them through darker times. The days that followed were filled with unrest. Some accepted the choice in silence, trusting the father's wisdom. Others avoided the boy, turning their backs when he passed. The 5 women went on with their lives, each carrying her own quiet reflection. Weaver worked with her hands, pouring her unspoken sorrow into her threads. The healer's daughter tended to the sick, her patience steady even when her heart was heavy. They did not speak against him, for bitterness had no place in their spirit, but their eyes no longer lingered on him with hope. The prisoner lived in the uneasy space between acceptance and rejection. Some of the people treated her with sharper suspicion than ever, watching her every move. Others looked at her with pity, believing she was caught in something she could not escape. Yet she held herself with the same quiet strength as always, her silence both her shield and her burden.
At night,
She wondered what fate awaited her now. She had not chosen this, but the boy had tied her to him, and she could not deny that part of her heart trembled with a strange, unspoken hope. The boy walked through it all with his head high, though the struggle inside him was far from over. He knew he had set himself against tradition, against expectation, but he felt lighter in the truth of his choice. He spent time with her when he could, speaking softly, trying to break through the walls she had built around herself. At first she answered little, her words few and careful. But slowly, as the days passed, she began to share pieces of her story. She spoke of her home, of the family she had lost, of the nights she had cried in silence where no one could see. And though her voice trembled, he listened with a heart that saw not a prisoner, but a woman whose spirit had never broken. The father watched from a distance, knowing his time was drawing near. His body weakened each day, his strength fading like the last glow of sunset. Yet he took comfort in seeing his son stand tall, even in the face of resistance. He had feared the boy would crumble under the weight, but instead he had found his voice, and that gave the old man peace. One evening he called his son to his side. With a hand that shook but a gaze still sharp, he told him that leadership was not about pleasing everyone, but about standing firm when the winds blew hardest. He told him to honor the woman he had chosen, not just because she was his wife now, but because she was a person with her own strength and dignity. Those were the last words of guidance he gave before the earth claimed him. When the father passed, the tribe gathered to mourn. His spirit was honored in the old ways, his memory tied to the land he had defended. In the silence that followed his passing, all eyes turned to the boy, now no longer just a son, but a leader. Many doubted him still, but none could deny his place. He stood before them with the prisoner at his side, and though the murmurs did not quiet, his resolve did not waver. Time began to shape them all. The prisoner, once a shadow in the camp, grew slowly into something more. Her strength and silence became a source of respect, her dignity a lesson even to those who had hated her. She worked with her hands, helped with tasks, and carried herself with grace that softened hearts over time. The boy grew into his role, learning to listen as much as he spoke, leading with patience even when anger rose against him. The tribe, though slower to change, began to see that unity could be built even from broken pieces. The 5 women each found their own paths. One was chosen by a warrior whose heart had long admired her laughter. Another took her healing to nearby settlements, helping those in need. Their lives stretched forward, different than expected, yet still full of meaning. The boy's choice had not destroyed them, but had given them new roads to walk. The elders never fully agreed, but they could not deny the passing seasons. The tribe did not fall apart. It endured, as it always had. And though some still held bitterness, others began to see the prisoner not as a curse, but as part of the weave of their lives. She was no longer only an outsider, though she would always carry the mark of where she came from. She had become more than a prisoner. She had become part of their story. Years passed, and the boy became a man marked by the fire of his decision. He carried the memory of his father's words, the weight of every look and whisper, and the love of the woman who had once stood apart from them all. Their children grew under the wide desert sky, carrying in their blood the strength of 2 worlds joined together. The story of his choice was told in the nights by the fire, not as a tale of betrayal, but as a tale of courage. It reminded the people that sometimes the strongest path is not the one that follows tradition, but the one that carves new ground. It reminded them that love, though dangerous, can be the force that binds even when everything else tries to pull apart. And so the desert carried on, the wind sweeping across the plains, the river flowing steady through the canyons. The boy, no longer just a son, but a leader and a father, stood often at the edge of camp, watching the horizon with quiet eyes. He had chosen the harder road, but it was his road, and it had carried him to where he was meant to stand. The prisoner, no longer bound in silence, stood beside him, her spirit unbroken, her presence steady. They had faced the storm, and together they had endured. The tribe, shaped by their choice, learned that survival was not only about holding to the past, but about finding strength in change. And in that truth, they found a future. The fire burned low in the night, sparks drifting into the sky like stars finding their place. The people gathered around it, their voices soft, their hearts tied by the shared memory of struggle and survival. And somewhere deep in the desert, where the land stretched wide and endless, the echo of that choice carried on, reminding them all that even the loneliest paths can lead to the strongest stories.